What's up guys, it's Paraly5er here. Today we're going to be ranking the tier 3 weapons inside of Grounded 1.4. Here we have every single tier 3 weapon, including the ranged ones, and we're going to be ranking every single one of them in a tier list today. These rankings, as always, are my opinions. If you don't like them, you're allowed your own opinions. This is just how I view the weapons and which ones I like and dislike personally. Let's get straight into it. First up, we have the Antline Greatsword. This is one of the first tier 3 weapons that you get, but it does cost a lot of pincers, and it's not the strongest weapon in the world. I'm going to say that this is a C tier weapon. Bit expensive to craft, not really worth getting. I'd rather get the Termite Axe as my first tier 3 weapon, and it is a two-handed slashing weapon, which is a very rare thing to find. It's actually the only two-handed slashing weapon that isn't elemental by default, which means it is pretty useful if you need like a slashing fresh weapon or something, but I wouldn't personally use it, so for that reason I'm putting it in C tier. Next we have the Black Ox Hammer. Again, I'm going to put this in C tier. This one's a bit of a pain to craft, however you do obviously need it for the story, so you're going to have one regardless. However, I personally don't like using this as a weapon. Some people would use this against Schmechter, however I would not recommend it. It's really not that good. If hammers were as fast as they used to be, then they'd be pretty decent, but since the speed nerf around 1.0, maybe earlier than that, they've never been the same, so for that reason it's going in C tier. Next up we have the Club of the Mother Demon. And this is an S tier weapon. This is one of the best weapons in the game. You obviously do need to beat the Broodmother in order to get this. However, the Broodmother is the easiest boss, and this is by far one of the best weapons. I would highly recommend anyone who can or should use this because it is simply amazing down every elemental path. I particularly like it down the salty path for taking on the Antlines in the sandbox or the Black Ox Beetles. I personally wouldn't go down the mighty path. I think you should always go elemental with every single one of these weapons, which is why I'm not going to mention the special mighty effects that a lot of the weapons have. For this reason, this weapon is S tier. You can upgrade it down every single path and it'll be amazing on every single one. I wouldn't use Barbarian with it, but I would still use it and it will destroy everything. Next, we have the Fire Ant Club. I'm actually going to put this in D tier this time. The reason for this is D tier is a weapon that I would never use, and I would never use the Fire Ant Club, because it's easier to get the Club of the Mother Demon than it is to get the Fire Ant Club, in my opinion. The Fire Ant Club is a bit of a pain to get. The Club of the Mother Demon, you don't even have to go to the upper yard to get the Club of the Mother Demon. The Club of the Mother Demon is overall just much stronger than it, so I would never ever choose to use the Fire Ant Club. There are no bonuses that would make me choose it over the Club of the Mother Demon. So for that reason, it's going in D tier. I would never choose to use this weapon. Next up, we have the Mint Mace. This weapon is also S tier. This one, you get the recipe from the picnic table burgle chip, and it is simply one of the best weapons in the game. This is one of the few exceptions where I'd say don't make a fresh Club of the Mother Demon. Instead, go ahead and make a Mint Mace and upgrade it down the Mighty Path, which is the only one you can choose, as it does get a special ability, which makes it so when you do the third hit of a combo, it does bonus damage. This thing is insanely good. It also does a bit of stun, I believe, the minty effect that you get from the 3-hit combo with this. It is an amazing weapon. I highly recommend it. For that reason, it is S tier. It is simply the best fresh weapon in the game. Next up, we have the Pinch Whacker. I'm going to put this in A tier. I'd say it's a pretty solid weapon. You can get it without any crafting. All you need to do is get a bomb and bomb open into the lab. It is definitely a really good early game weapon, at least until you get to the upper yard, and then it is also really good once you do get to New Game Plus. It gets kind of a revitalization if you can get a Mad Scientist trinket, because this thing gets really buffed with Mad Scientist. So for that reason, I'm going to say it's A tier. It's pretty good, and I'd highly recommend it. Next, we have the Prod Smacker. I'm going to put this one in B tier. You have to beat every single mixer and super mixer in order to make this thing, which makes it not easy to get in the slightest. However, once you do get it, it's a pretty solid weapon. It's nothing too crazy. It's kind of built for charged builds, which is better for multiplayer than single player. However, it can be pretty good, especially when you get to New Game Plus and you get that Mad Scientist effect. That could also make it even better. However, me personally, I wouldn't choose to use it, but it can have its uses and it can be pretty good. So for that reason, I'm putting it in B tier. Next up, we have the Rusty Spear. I'm going to put this in A tier as well. This is a solid weapon. It's particularly good when you throw it. Meleeing it with it is nowhere near as good, but when you throw it is when it comes into its element. It becomes really powerful and does massive amounts of damage, especially to things like termites in the Termite Hill. You could go down an elemental path with this. Usually I would choose Sour, as it makes it really good underwater for taking on virtually every enemy. When thrown, it'll one-tap everything. So for that reason, it is an A tier weapon. It is extremely strong, it is pretty easy to get, and overall, very good. Next up, we have the Salt Morning Star. I'm going to say this is A tier as well. This is amazing for taking on the Wasp Queen and the Mantis, especially in New Game Plus. It's really, really good for those two bosses. And overall, a really good salty weapon. The special ability from the 3-hit combo is really nice. It gives bleed to the enemies. And I would just say, in general, this is a really good weapon. You get it from unlocking the treasure chest inside of the sandbox. And yeah, overall, very, very powerful. The thing that stops it from being S tier for me is that the Salty Club of the Mother Demon is overall much, much better. And if you can use it against the Mantis and Wasp Queen, you should. However, it is a bit too risky on New Game Plus, so usually you're going to want to use the Salt Morningstar. But the Salty Club of the Mother Demon for regular enemies is going to be the better choice. So for that reason, I can't quite put the Salt Morningstar in S tier, but it is a very good weapon nonetheless. Next up, we have the Scythe of Blossoms. I'm going to put this in B tier. It's a two-handed axe weapon that does slashing and chopping damage. Although once you upgrade it down an elemental path, I believe it removes the slashing damage and just becomes a chopping weapon. However, it doesn't work with Chopper, it only works with Assassin, which inflicts bleed. It would be much better if it did work with Chopper, as Chopper is a much better effect. You do have to beat the Mantis in order to make this, which makes it very, very hard to achieve. And I would say that this weapon is just not my cup of tea. It's typically very good for crit builds, and I just don't really run that sort of build. I'm going to put this in B tier, me personally. It is a very strong weapon and can be very good with the right build, just like the Prod Smacker, but it's not really good with every build, which I think every weapon above it can be used with pretty much any build, and it'll still be very solid. The weapons in B tier are weapons that kind of need a specific build for them to work. Next up, we have the Acid Edge, or the Sour Battle Axe. I prefer the Sour Battle Axe. I don't know why they changed it to S tier. S tier. This weapon's the best sour weapon in the game. Once you beat Schmector, which is kind of difficult to do, but it more than makes up for it because it just clears out everything. It destroys everything. You need it for the Jar-O-Matic to destroy everything, at least until you get to like New Game Plus 4. It is extremely good. Absolutely get this weapon and use it as soon as you get it. It's amazing. S tier weapon, no debates here. Next up, we have the Spicy Cortana. Now, for me, this is a B tier weapon. I don't find myself using the Cortana much. I know some people love it, some people don't love it so much. You find it in the upper yard in the charcoal bag, and you've got to do a Ladybird lava defense. Very annoying. It is a pretty powerful weapon, don't get me wrong, but I'd rather use a Spicy Club of the Mother Demon or spicy version of the next weapon that we have on the list, because I just don't think that the Cortana is anywhere near as good, and for me, it's just too thin. Whenever I hit things, it seems to miss because the blade is so thin, compared to like a club, which is much thicker and has a much wider hit scan area. So for that reason, I just can't choose to use the Spicy Cortana. I just don't like using it, and it's not something that I'm a fan of. So for that reason, I'm putting it in B tier. It is very useful against the Broodmother, and I guess other spiders, but I could use any other weapon against the other spiders, like our next weapon on the list here, the Termite Axe. A very, very good overall weapon. This weapon is easy to get. It is versatile. I usually go down the spicy path because then I can kill the spiders very easily with it, as well as cooking my meat very easily. This thing is simply amazing. Obviously, if you use a spicy version of any weapon and then kill something, it's going to give you the cooked meat instead of just the regular. And for that reason, I like going with the Spicy Termite Axe because I want one of my weapons to also have a utility like the axe where it can chop stuff down. The reason I prefer this over the Scythe of Blossoms is because it works with Chopper, whereas the Scythe of Blossoms works with Assassin. And I think Chopper is a much better ability. For that reason, the Termite Axe is a solid A tier weapon. It's really, really good, really, really strong. I would say, though, once you get into the higher New Game Pluses, or just the late game in general, it can start to drop off a bit. So you could switch to a Spicy Club of the Mother Demon at that point, or you could keep using the Termite Axe. It is good enough to get you through the game, but in those New Game Pluses, you might start to struggle a bit. But you could get some of the new weapons like the Wallopino or the Blazing Edge, which I would definitely recommend upgrading to when you can. Next up, we have the Tick Makawaka Weaver and the Tiger Mosquito Rapier. These two are C tier weapons. They give you lifesteal, which is cool. But these are for lower skilled players. They do barely any damage. They're really, really weak in terms of damage. But if you're trying to stay alive and you're not very good at the game, then these things can be pretty useful for keeping you alive with the lifesteal ability. They're just not my cup of tea. I prefer to use something that does a lot of damage, not something that does barely any damage that's going to heal me a bunch, because I don't need heals, because I'm going to parry majority of attacks. Toenail Scimitar next. This is a solid A tier weapon, I would say. Very, very good for beating the IBM if you have it down the fresh path. I very much like it for that, but outside of that, I would say that the Mint Mace is a better fresh weapon, the Sour Battle Axe is a better sour weapon, and the Club of the Mother Demon is better down the salty and spicy paths, or the Termite Axe down the spicy path. I personally wouldn't choose to use the Toenail Scimitar outside of the IBM boss fight, but it's just so good for that boss fight that me personally, I'm putting it in A tier. It is still a very solid overall weapon. It's just a little bit of a pain to craft. And other than that IBM fight, I can't really find another instance where I would choose to use it. For our final melee weapon, we have the Widow Dagger. I'm going to put this inside of C tier as well. I never find myself using this thing unless I'm underwater gathering pond moss. That sums up this weapon. Yeah, I pretty much only use it for pond moss gathering. I don't really use it outside of that. Some people do like to use this. I'm actually going to put it in B. With the right build, with a lot of crits and stuff, it can be very, very good. But it's just not my cup of tea. It can be very good for summon builds as well because of the fast swing speed. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. Not really my thing, but it has its few uses and it can be decent at certain times. So for me, it's a B tier, also a bit of a pain to get because of the Super Spider Venom. Now that we're done with melee weapons, we're moving on to ranged weapons, starting with the Ant Queen Staff. This thing shoots acid out of it at your enemies. I'm going to say that this is a B tier. It's a decent weapon. This is nothing revolutionary, but it's a pretty decent weapon. It does decent damage. It can be used pretty well in the Wasp Queen fight for taking out the summons, but I would personally choose another weapon over it. If you like ranged builds, this thing's okay. Me personally, I wouldn't really use it. I'm gonna put the Mint Staff in D tier. I hate this thing. It's a staff that has 0 range. If you're going to use this, just use the Mint Mace. It pretty much has the same range on it and does way more damage, and you can actually parry. This thing has barely any range, even though it's a ranged weapon, does barely any damage, and you can barely parry with it because of the massive delay on staffs. So for that reason, D tier, I would never use this weapon. Sour Staff next. This thing can be pretty decent. I'm going to put it in B tier. It's pretty good if you either like playing ranged builds for the Java-matic, or if you like playing ranged for Schmector, like when you can't get near him, you can use the staff to do some additional damage. Or, my favourite use for it is for taking down moths in the upper yard. It's very, very good for that. It stuns them a lot and stops them from attacking you. So for that reason, I'm putting it in B tier. It does have a very good use for taking down those moths, and it can be used in the Schmector boss fight, but I don't tend to find myself carrying it with me all the time. I'll just pick it up if and when I need it, so for that reason, I'm putting it in B tier. Finally, we have the Spicy Staff. I'm going to put this in A tier. I would definitely use this in the Wasp Queen fight for taking out the drones and other summons. It's very, very good for that. However, outside of that, I tend to not find myself using it too much. If I'm taking down scarabs, though, I will use it in the upper yard to chase after them and shoot them. This does a lot of damage and has a wide AoE. It's definitely the best of the 3 staffs, and I would definitely recommend you have one and upgrade it for those specific instances. So for that reason, it's an A tier, a very solid weapon. Next up, we have the Moldy Matriarch Bomb. I'm going to put this in B tier. If you're using a build specifically with this weapon and the full set of armor, it can be really powerful, but it only really works with the full set of Moldy Matriarch armor. Just like a few of the other things in this section, it's only really good if you run a full build for it. However, I would say that this is a very good utility item in New Game Plus. You should definitely get it for that, because you can use it to blow up all of the rocks around the map, and you don't have to carry a bunch of bombs or craft a bunch of bombs. So for that reason, I am going to put it in B tier. I think it can be very useful. The problems I have with it is it's not sticky, and you can't stick the bombs to things, so I can never use it against the Wasp Queen, for example. Me personally, I would have made it have multiple upgrade paths instead of just mighty. They should have had regular, sticky, cluster, and a bunch of other upgrade paths that would change the way the bomb acts. I think this would have been a much better choice for this weapon. I think the way it is right now, just not good enough for me, and I wouldn't choose to use it unless you're using a specific build. So for that reason, B tier. Next, we have the Black Ox Crossbow and the Bard's Bow, the 2 bow choices for tier 3. I really like the Black Ox Crossbow. I'm going to put it in A tier. Bard's Bow, I'm going to put in B tier. I think Bard's Bow, with the right build, is very, very good. And if you're in multiplayer, it's also very, very good with that build, because you can summon a bunch of stuff and you can get a bunch of effect buffs for your teammates. And it's really, really solid. For that reason, it goes in B. Black Ox Crossbow can be used even if you're not running a full ranged build. If you're just running like a regular loadout and you're running around the yard, it's definitely the best ranged weapon of choice. It's very, very strong. And I'd highly recommend you carry one if you get the chance and you want to take on some flying enemies like wasps, for example. It's a very good choice there. So for that reason, I'm putting it in A tier. It's a very solid weapon. And now we have some arrows left. Splinter arrows, I'm putting in C tier. I'm not a huge fan of these arrows. They do the most damage of any of the base arrows. However, I prefer feather arrows due to the bleed, and these things have too much drop off. I don't really like how much they drop and arc when you shoot them. So for that reason, I'm just going to put them in C. I'm not a huge fan. Sour arrows are an interesting one. I would say these would probably be... I'm going to put these in B tier alongside the Sour Staff. You could use these for the Java-matic. You could use these to take down Schmector. I personally don't choose to use these. Again, you could use these against the Moths. This wouldn't be my area of choice for those enemies, but it is an option that you can run. So for that reason, it is B tier. It's a pretty useful item if you need it. Super Gas Arrows. I'm going to put these in C tier. I never find myself using these. I don't really recommend them. You could use them to defend the Java-matic or some of the mixers or super mixers. It would help with AoE damage. However, they're just not my thing. So for that reason, I'm putting them in C. Super Venom Arrows, I'm putting them in D. Expensive to craft and just not that venomous at all. The venom stuff in this game just really isn't that strong. So for that reason, they're going in D tier. They just don't do enough damage at all and they're expensive to craft. Finally, bomb arrows are going in C tier. As a weapon, they just really aren't that good. They're a bit expensive to craft. They're very similar to the super gas arrows where they do like an AoE effect. They can be useful sometimes, but I really don't like using them as a weapon. I'll put them in C tier though, because they can blow up rocks and do some actual useful things in the game as well. That's my full tier 3 tier list. If you're wondering where any of the new Game Plus weapons are, I'll have a separate tier list for those. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like on it. Let me know if you'd move anything around in this tier list and where you would put it. I'll see you in the next Grounded video. Have a great rest of your day.